We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed.
U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio giving the U.S. justification for military action against Iran. He spoke just ahead of briefing members of the U.S. Congress in Washington. Rubio also told reporters that he hopes the Iranian people can overthrow their government, but maintained the objective of the U.S. mission was to eliminate Iran's military threats. The U.S. strikes on Iran have propelled the question of international law to the forefront, for some at least. Were these strikes legally justified? And what are the implications? Feisal al-Istrabadi joins us now. He was the Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations and is now the director of the Center for the Study of the Middle East at Indiana University. Thank you very much for joining us. What do you make of what you heard from Marco Rubio and the Trump administration's justification for the attack?
That is the stupidest justification for going to war I have heard in my 63 years. I can't believe that the Secretary of State of the United States said that the United States went to war because it couldn't prevent its closest ally in the region from attacking Iran, an ally which depends on its military hardware and on its economic well-being, and to a large extent on the United States. That is the justification for the families that have lost members of the armed forces over the last 24 hours. It is mind-blowing to me as a United States citizen.
Let's talk about the legality, and there are multiple ways to look at this. There's international law. There is sort of the internal legal framework for the United States. You can start in either place, but how would you describe the legality or lack thereof of what the United States has done?
Well, from an international perspective, there are two, in the post-World War II era, that is to say, under the UN Charter and customary international law, there are only two legal uses of force. One is in self-defense, and the other is when the Security Council has authorized the use of force. Neither one of those two justifications for the use of force apply. Every other use of force, including the current use of force in Iran, is illegal. The law is really not very complicated. Under domestic U.S. law, under the Constitution of the United States, I would argue, although I'm not an expert on the U.S. Constitution, but it would seem to me as a lawyer that in the absence of an emergency requiring an immediate response by the president, under the terms of the U.S. Constitution, the president should have gone to Congress for an authorization for the use of force in this case, which would mean he would have to explain and justify the use of force, at least to Congress, if not to the American people.
Let's focus on international law for a second. And you've said, and you're not the only person, that this seems to be a clear breach of international law on the part of the United States. You didn't use those words exactly, but I'm paraphrasing your analysis of what happened. So you have unilateral American action in Venezuela. You have the United States taking action here for the reasons we just heard from Marco Rubio. And so if it is in fact a breach of some basic principles of international law, does it matter?
It does, because the principle that I articulated a moment ago, and your paraphrase was quite accurate. You got me exactly. The principle against the use of force, except in the two circumstances I mentioned, has, however imperfectly, largely maintained peace around the world. It has not been perfect, and certainly the United States, as Mark Carney reminded us a month ago, has been from time to time an abuser of the system. But Carney seemed to lament the fact that the rules-based system was being destroyed by the United States. So how is it that Canada now supports this action without any legal justification? And what is the justification for saying that Putin acted illegally, but Western powers support the United States and Iran? They've both violated the same basic norms. There's one last point, and it's this. customary international law depends very much on what states say it is. So when states start to accept what is currently a lawless use of force, it is actually the norm itself that is degraded. And that is my fear.
So that's a really interesting analysis from the international law perspective. Let me ask you something about just, what's happening in the Middle East right now, and in particular, Hezbollah striking Israel from Lebanon, Israel striking back. How concerning is that to you in terms of expanding this conflict?
Well, that, of course, has always been the fear that this could get out of hand. I have no doubt that in the end, the United States and Israel will prevail, however that's defined and whatever their objectives are. And I don't know what their objectives are in Iran. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of chaos. And that's something the region doesn't need. I am concerned about what comes next in Iran. I don't think the U.S. administration has given that 2 hours worth of thought. I don't think they care. As far as Netanyahu is concerned, I think he would be delighted to have instability, chaos, and even a failed state in Iran. I don't think that will serve the people of Iran well. No one has thought what happens next, what comes next, and that is deeply concerning to me.
So there's what comes next in maybe the short term or the medium term. Let's talk about the short term for a moment, and this will be my last question to you. We've got the United States saying more firepower, more force is yet to come. We've got Iran saying, based on some of the reporting I've seen, that they are prepared for a long conflict, and they too can increase the amount of firepower that they use. How do you feel the next few days, but more importantly, the next few weeks will unfold?
Well, I assume that Iran will have its capacity to respond degraded over time. I presume that process has already begun. So some of this, I think, is bluster. But the question I have is, to what end? Bring in more firepower. Nobody doubted that the United States has infinitely more firepower than Iran has. But to what end? To what end are we spilling blood, and is our own blood being spilt and the treasure being expended? What is the strategic objective? Why did the United States go to war? Neither the president nor the Secretary of Defense nor the Secretary of State have explained what the strategic objective is. Why should the American public support this war? We don't know.
Although, hasn't the president said that the strategic objective here is to prevent Iran from building more ballistic missiles and kind of regrouping and becoming a military power once again?
Well, that's not a strategic objective, by the way. That is a goal, but it is not a strategic objective. And he could probably have had that during negotiations. The Iranians were negotiating, and both times they negotiated with him, he bombed them, making it appear that the negotiations were a ruse, which is a terrible precedent to set. I already have the chair of the Armed Services Committee, Senator Graham, saying Cuba is next. Where does this end? This is not the agenda that Trump promised his electors when he ran for office, neither in 2020 nor in 2024. And I think it's deeply disturbing that he can take the country to war without articulating a strategic objective. If he doesn't want Iran to have nuclear weapons, there's a very good argument, in my opinion, that the man he killed on Saturday is the reason Iran didn't have nuclear weapons, because he had issued a juridical ruling barring Iran from making nuclear weapons. That, I realize, is a conversation for another day. But there are some real contradictory signals coming around from all over the place in this war.
Feisal al-Istrabadi is a former Iraqi ambassador to the United Nations and director of the Center for the Study of the Middle East at Indiana University. Thank you very much.
Thank you.